All right. Good morning, everyone. Hey, it's great to be with you. Generally, I'm getting after you for doing all the talking, and here I was up here talking this morning. I missed the countdown. Hey, it's great to be with you, whether you're in person or online. This last Monday night, we kicked off Teach Your Children Well here on Monday night. And we got another session coming up on the 22nd. It was a great start. So if you missed it, you can jump in on June 22nd. I got to help out with childcare, which was really cool. Me and Polly and Reagan, one of our teenagers, and Adam Woodruff. And I'm hanging out with the kids. I told them my name was Mr. Fun. They loved it. They loved me. Your children love me. I just want you to know that. But I was sitting at a table with all the kids, and I said, kids, how cool would it be if I were to be up here every Sunday with you? And one of the boys goes, bro. And like in the moment, I thought he's for me, and I realized quickly he was not. And then another child told me that I had a bald spot, and I said, well, what about Mr. Fun's friend, Adam? And they were like, he's bald. So bald spot, bald, I don't know. But hey, listen, children are a gift from God, and it was really cool to be upstairs with them. Hey, and I'm totally serious. If you are parenting a grade school kid, or you're grandparenting a grade school kid, I want to encourage you to show up June 22nd. It is good stuff, and your heart will be encouraged. Speaking of children, this is a true story that happened one night to a guy named Kevin Stonehouse. He was at his home, and all of a sudden Grubhub rang his doorbell, and they dropped off some chicken fingers and cheese fries. And at first he thought, God really loves me, because he had not ordered the chicken fingers and the cheese fries. But that was followed by 3 more orders about 10 minutes later, and the food just kept coming over and over and over again. All of them were addressed to him, and he could not figure out where the food was coming from until he remembered that he had seen his son Mason, who was 6 years old, walking around the house with his phone. And apparently Mason had gotten into the Grubhub app and just started ordering whatever looked good to him. And after the 5th order showed up, Kevin went looking for Mason, and he found him under the bed. And he said, son, what have you done? To which Mason replied, I was hungry. And Kevin started to explain how it was not okay to just randomly order things off of Grubhub, and then the doorbell rang again. And Mason replied, that must be my pizza. And Mason had put in an order of pizza, not just, well, it was a big order, for $439 worth of pizza. All told, Mason had ordered some $1,500 worth of food. So Kevin and his wife began calling their neighbors to come and take food, and immediately they changed the passcodes on their phone. Here's the truth. Hunger can drive you and me to all kinds of bad decisions. Hunger is absolutely one of the very worst feelings that a human can experience. And when you're hungry, you quickly can go to hangry. And from there, you can be a person that's unbearable to be around, or someone else is unbearable. And then after a few days of not eating, you actually lose your ability to concentrate, and then you have trouble sleeping, and eventually your body just begins to break down, and your immune system is compromised, and your whole body just begins to fall apart. And the same thing is true spiritually. Same thing's true spiritually for all of us. This morning, we're going to see, by beginning in the I am statements, Jesus in his own words. Last week, I kind of set it up and kind of gave you the history of where the whole I am thing came from the book of Exodus. But this morning, we're going to see how Jesus satisfies the deepest hungers that we have. And here's the deal. The core of many of our spiritual problems is actually a spiritual hunger. The core of many, if not all, of our spiritual problems is actually a spiritual hunger. And Jesus speaks directly to this hunger and to our spiritual problems with the very first I am statement that we get in the Gospel of John. And this is where we're going to begin this summer, is actually in John chapter 6, verse 35. So if you brought a Bible this morning, I'm going to encourage you to open up to John chapter 6. That's where we're going to be for the balance of our time together. Now, I'm going to read in just a moment John 6:35, but I just want to kind of just frame it out for just 10 seconds. This is one of the longest chapters in the Gospel of John. John actually spends, I think it's 71 verses. I'm just off the top of my head. I think it's 71 verses in John chapter 6, actually extrapolating and helping us understand what it means. We're in verse 35, almost at the midpoint of the chapter, where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And so John chapter 6 is this big, long narrative, this big, long story of all these things that happen where Jesus unpacks what it means to be the bread of life. So John 6:35, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So last week, if you want to know, like, where's the origin of all this I am stuff come from, you can go back and listen to last week's message. But it's the way that it's God's name for himself begins with I am who I am. And so when Jesus uses the words I am, and he says, I am the bread of life, and this summer we're going to look at all these different I am statements that's full of weight. And so the story in John chapter 6 actually begins with the feeding of the 5,000. It's one of the most popular or most prominent stories in all of Scripture. And John chapter 6 begins in verse 1. And so here's how the story begins. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. Catch this. A large crowd kept following him. Why did they keep following him? Because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus had been healing people, and guess what? In their day and age, when people get healed of their sickness, people notice, and what do people do? They follow. Why do people follow Jesus? Because some of them are sick, or they know someone who is sick. If in their day and age, if someone suddenly was healed of a sickness that had plagued a person for decades, would you not want more of that? Yeah, you would. Verse 3, Jesus went up to the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now, here's where the story turns a little bit more. Now, the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. John in his gospel is marking the moment. The Passover, which is full of meaning for God's people. In verse 5, when he looked up and saw a large crowd coming towards them, Jesus said to Philip, one of his disciples, where are we going to buy bread for these people to eat? This huge crowd is following Jesus. They're looking for signs to heal the sick. Passover is near. They're hungry. And Jesus says, well, what are we going to do? And I'll spare you the details and not read you the balance of the story. But what's so beautiful about the story in John chapter 6 is that in the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus actually feeds the people. Jesus actually serves the people. And he asks the people not just to sit down, but in the Greek, it says he asked the people to recline. There's a difference in sitting and reclining. When you recline, you are at a banquet, and the crowd goes wild. Not only is this a man who suddenly can heal people physically, but all of a sudden, this is a man that is able to feed people physically and take care of hunger. And the crowd goes wild. Why do they go wild? Well, you got to know just a little bit of history. And part of the history is that the emperor, anytime he wanted to kind of bump his ratings, his approval ratings, guess what he would do? He'd just throw a little bread to the people. He'd feed the people just a little bit, just to kind of bump his approval ratings, right? And so all of a sudden the crowd goes wild. And look at the response of the crowd in John chapter 6, verse 14. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, this is indeed the prophet who has come into the world. That's from Deuteronomy. That's right, and that's true, right? Let's go to verse 15. When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Jesus goes, no. This is not the way that I am to become king. The truth is they saw a sign, but they actually had the wrong interpretation of the sign. Then one more quick story to get to Jesus' words in John chapter 6, verse 35. The disciples take off and they leave in a boat. But Jesus stays. He's on the mountain. And then Jesus goes to actually meet the disciples. It's the story of Jesus walking on the water. And look what happens in verse 19. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming to the boat, and they were terrified. Wouldn't you be terrified too? If you saw a man suddenly walking on the sea, right? But he said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. Now here's what's so important about this. It's actually the same language from the book of Exodus. It's Jesus saying, I am is here. Don't be afraid. Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land to which they were going. Now, tons of sermons can be preached about how did the boat go from where it was to there immediately? Like, what was that all about? But here's the point. The point is, in this little interaction, Jesus fully reveals who he is. He's not just a prophet. Jesus is I am. And the next day, the crowd showed up. They found Jesus. And once again, Jesus said in John 6:35, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. What's so interesting to me about this text and about the story is that bread in this text is actually used in a diagnostic sense. Their deeper hunger for bread reveals their deeper hunger for things that they don't even have categories for. See, Jesus is trying to move the disciples and the crowd from a focus on what sustains the body to what actually feeds the soul and gives them life. There's deeper and deeper and deeper levels to following Jesus. I'm about to make an assumption here, and sometimes when I make assumptions, I get in trouble, but I think it's worth taking a shot on this one. Far and away, we are a blessed people and not having to worry about where our next meal will come from. But the currency of their day was actually was bread. It consumed the majority of a family's labor and income to produce it and to have it. And without it, death was imminent. There wasn't a run to the Walmarts to get it. There wasn't like, which Walmarts are you going to go to? The one on Parker or the one on Highland? Oh, you want to go to a Walmart neighborhood market? Well, there's 2 more of those. Oh, you don't want to go there? You can go to Kroger. Oh, you can go to Aldi. Like the list could go on, right? It wasn't like that. As the people of God, they've been telling stories for generations of God providing bread. It began in the wilderness with God providing manna, a bread-like substance to sustain his people. It was in the temple. That's where bread was also. And it was also played a role in the Passover, which is like this text and this story is so full of weight. It's endless. And when you shared bread with someone, you were actually sharing life with them. So maybe, just maybe, we're missing it a bit in our context when we talk exclusively about bread because of our situation. So let me try to frame it in a different way so maybe it can seep deeper into our hearts when Jesus says, I am the bread of life. So let me just raise this question. Let's just be honest for 10 seconds. Have you ever been anxious about money? If you've ever been anxious about money, would you raise your hand for a moment? My guess is everyone here has at some point, whether you're willing and able to raise your hand. Have you ever structured your life or given major focus in your life to acquiring money? Because in our world, money is about the equivalent of bread in their day and age. You have to have it. So when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, another way to say it for us is, hey church, hey friends, I'm actually what you're working for. I can fulfill that need to chase money. Have you ever worried about your health and physical survival? How much resource do we spend on preserving the body? Jesus says, I am the bread of life. I give you life that extends beyond the capacity of your physical body. What about belonging and relational connectedness? From the jump of this church, we've talked about how we live in a world that is overcome with the epidemic of loneliness. How many of us hunger for community and acceptance? How many of us hunger for meaningful relationships? You know, in John 6, they share bread and community, and all of John 6 is actually communal. And so when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, I think what Jesus is saying is, I can fulfill all of your relational needs and fill your life with healthy belonging. Well, what about those of you or those of us who are looking for purpose and identity? Got to have a great conversation with someone this past week about generation of college students and how they're looking for a career path. And if they don't find that, it brings anxiety to them. Because so much of the mantra of the day is like, you've got to know what you're going to do. You've got to know what you're going to do. You've got to know what you're going to do. And there's a lot of us who are older, post-college, who spent time in college trying to figure out what we're going to do and changing majors numerous times, or getting out of college and changing careers and doing something different. But we spend so much time working on a career and achievements, it can breed anxiety among us. See, when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, Jesus is actually speaking directly to the one who has everything materially, but actually feels empty. When Jesus says, I am the bread of life, Jesus is speaking directly to our college students who are trying to, or let me rephrase that. Jesus is speaking directly to our college adults who are trying to answer the question, who am I and what am I going to be? Bread was the one thing, and actually water, but Jesus hasn't said that yet about the I am, about water. You got to wait a few weeks for that. There are things they couldn't live without. But Jesus steps into the real, specific, concrete hungers his original audience faced, and John's readers faced. And actually, Jesus speaks into the real, concrete hungers that you and I face. And he says, guess what, gang? I am what you are looking for. Notice this about Jesus in the text, is that Jesus always starts where the crowd is. He always meets the crowd in the moment, but Jesus is always inviting people to something more. Joe said this morning something along the lines of, just like, join us where you can. That was my paraphrase of what he said, or maybe I was just listening for it because I knew I was going to preach on it. But that's the heart of this church, is you join us where you can. But if you will join us where you can, we believe that Jesus will want to take you to deeper and deeper and deeper places. And throughout John's gospel, there are these signs that are pointing towards something, but each sign has a deeper and a truer reality attached to it. This is why John 6 begins with the feeding of the 5,000, then Jesus walking on water, and many verses given to Jesus explaining why he is the bread of life. Because each sign points to something deeper and deeper and deeper. If you and I are willing to open our eyes, each sign points to a deeper spiritual hunger that we face. But the crowd, what are they looking for? Jesus points to it in John 6:26. Where he says, very truly I tell you, you are looking, what is it? Very truly I tell you, you are looking for not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Like the crowd, it is entirely possible for one to experience the benefits of the work of Jesus, but miss the deeper meaning and purpose of what Jesus is actually doing. And I want to confess to you, as I have wrestled with this text in the last week, this is where I have been hung up all week in this very long chapter. Jesus speaks to the crowd about something I've called a sign-based faith. I'm categorizing it this way. A sign-based faith is relating to Jesus in terms of what he provides rather than who he is. It's actually need-driven rather than person-driven. John's gospel makes it very clear that the crowd has an interest in Jesus who feeds rather than Jesus himself. They're out of food and they want to be fed. I mean, if I'm out of food, I want to be fed. When the food is gone or the demand for discipleship increases, their faith or willingness to say yes actually evaporates a little bit in this text. The brutal reality is actually spelled out in John 6, verse 66. Because of this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer went about with him. See, there was a demand to following Jesus. There was a call to following Jesus. They were like, hey, Jesus, if you'll just crank out some food for me, I'm good. But when you start asking me to do some things, like, I'm out. So just for a moment, I just want to talk about this. Like, I think there's some characteristics to a sign-based faith. A sign-based faith seeks repetition of the experience. That's why in verse 30 of John 6, the crowd says, hey, to Jesus, they go, hey, well, what sign are you going to give us? Because if you'll give us a sign, then we can actually believe in you. What work are you performing? More and more, their language in John 6 is actually, Jesus, if you would just perform for us, we'd be on board. Which actually leads to the second characteristic of a sign-based faith, is that it's transactional. Jesus, if you do something cool and you perform, then I will follow you. If we are stuck, or we spend all of our time in a sign-based faith, faith becomes this if-then proposition. You do something, Jesus, and if I value it as good enough, or if it benefits me enough, then I will follow you. There's some language down there in verses 41 and 42 where the people begin to grumble with Jesus. Interestingly enough, what's the timing of the story? When does it take place? This is the crowd response time of the story, the sermon? At Passover. And the same language used in John 6, 41 and 42 is just like the Israelites who had been rescued at Passover, or that they're actually out in the wilderness grumbling. See, a sign-based faith cannot survive the offense of the cross. We're going to get to that text in a bit, but there's a cruciform reality following Jesus. And if we're in the place of a sign-based faith, which I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but suffering and dying don't compute. If your faith is built or designed exclusively for signs, then it cannot and it will not hold up when suffering and dying show up. I started my ministry career in Alabama with a really great group of people, wonderful church, and we had in this very prolific speaker to present for a weekend, and he had a contract that we had to sign. So, I mean, he was big time because, like, he had a contract, like we had to sign it. And in his contract, he said, no donuts on Sunday morning. No, sorry, on Saturday morning and Sunday morning, no donuts at church. And we just laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed about this. And if you think I'm plucky now, you should have seen me when I was 22 years old or 23 years old. And I had to go pick this guy up from the airport and take him to his hotel. And then I had to pick him up from his hotel and bring him to church. And so I picked him up from the hotel and I bring him to church. And I go, well, we can't have donuts today because your contract said we couldn't have donuts. And he said, young man, he was an older guy with gray hair, bald spot. I said, do you know why you cannot have donuts in my presentation? And I said, no, sir, I do not. You know, like rolling my eyes, like, get this old man out of my car. And he said, because people will get a sugar high and then they will get sleepy and they will not hear a single thing that I have to say. And now I understand why you respond as you do at my preaching after you've all eaten donuts. Everybody's jazzed for worship, and I get up here and it's like, conk, you're out. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I want to be clear. When our faith is continually, and maybe even for decades or even generations, stuck at a sign-based level, spiritual lethargy is the outcome, and we are pretty much trained, and we develop an appetite only to chase the next sugar high of spirituality. And here's why I don't like this text. And this is what I had to wrestle with this last week. Because the truth is I spent way too many years being content with that kind of faith. And here's the beauty of Jesus. I say he's never dismissive of me and you if that's where we are. And he loves it when we're hungry and we need something and we ask for it. And he loves to give. But I think there's also a sadness associated with it because Jesus knows that there's so much more than just having a sign-based faith. To go deeper, to see the signs and the realities that they're pointing towards is actually an abiding faith. One more time, John 6:35. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. See, belief in John's gospel, my friends, is highly relational. It's about being connected to Jesus in this deep, heartfelt way. It's about being connected to him in such a way that you'll want to go deeper, that you'll say yes to the invitation to go deeper. I'm defining that as an abiding faith, actually an ever-deepening relationship with Jesus. And here, just as we wrap up this portion of it this morning, let me try to spell out for you what an abiding faith looks like. See, church, an abiding faith is person-oriented, not benefit-oriented. It's where you come to fall in love with the person of Jesus and not the tricks or not the things that you hope Jesus will do for you. It's why at the very end of the story, the crowd leaves Jesus and Jesus looks around at the disciples. He's like, well, what are you going to do? And Peter, whom I love, says, well, where can I go? Where can we go? You have the words of eternal life. And there was a point in my life where this verse became so important for me because the truth is that I wanted to give up. I wanted to quit on Jesus. I was ready to walk away from it all. And I took a long look at quitting faith while I was practicing ministry. So that's a whole nother sermon or a whole nother therapy appointment. But I was in the middle of it, and I was wondering, like, is this really what I want to do? Is this really what I want to be about? And I decided that the words of Peter were right on target. Well, where would I go? And if you've been around here much, you know that the deepest places in my heart are both for the sufferers and for the quitters. For the people who have been hurt and are hurting, and the people who have quit, and the people who want to quit. So an abiding faith is person-oriented. It's not benefit-oriented. It's sustained by the word and not circumstances. In the beginning, John 1 says, was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's sustained by the Word and not circumstances. And that's why Jesus can say in this text, the words I have given to you are spirit and life. An abiding faith is able to endure the offense and the mystery of the gospel. Can we be honest? We can't put God in a box. Like, we can't understand everything that Jesus is doing or Jesus is going to do. We can't even understand everything Jesus is inviting us to do. And an abiding faith has to say, okay, I believe and I am in relationship and I am attached and I am attuned so much with Jesus himself that I can trust him even when this doesn't make sense and even when this is hard. And finally, it can participate in mutual indwelling. That's why Jesus can say, abide in me, which we'll get to at the very end of the summer. It's not merely intellectual assent or moral compliance. It's Christ in you, and it's you and Christ. It is a union that you were made for, a union that you were created for. And so here is the promise of Jesus. I am the bread of life, and whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So it is true this morning, I believe, that it is completely possible for our spiritual hungers, for our deepest needs to be satisfied fully and completely all together in Christ Jesus. And I believe that the deepest invitation this morning is to trust the words of Jesus. Because guess what? This morning, Jesus already saw you coming. And can you imagine the conversation in the heavenly places? Jesus going, oh yeah, I see them trying to get in the car this morning, and I see their family having like a DEFCON 5 fight and trying to get here. And somebody in their house is looking for a pair of socks. And somebody in their house is trying to say, I'm sick and tired of this church thing, and I don't know if I want to go do it again. And Jesus saying, today I want to serve you just like Jesus did in the feeding of the 5,000. So I think this morning is to let Jesus, the invitation is to let Jesus serve us, to see him for who he truly is, and to allow the signs of faith to take us to the deepest places with him. So we're going to put a little bookmark here. We're going to worship for just a moment, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to talk about a few more words that Jesus shares in John chapter 6 as we prepare to take communion together this morning. But I just want to end with this little word right now, and this is it, is that Jesus can handle the real you. Jesus can handle the real you. Your worries about money, your worries about belonging, your worries about purpose, identity, your job, your friends, your family, your worries about faith, your pushback about faith. Jesus can handle the real you, and the invitation this morning is to say, all right, Jesus, you want me? This is it. This is who I am. This is what I'm carrying. This is what I'm dealing with. And Jesus, in his loving way, will remind you that he is the bread of life and that he has come to sustain you and to feed you. Let's worship together this morning. We're going to come back and we're going to share in a time of communion.
Sing this with me.